A very good afternoon to all the audience, the panel members. It is my pleasure that I welcome all of you on behalf of the Center for Policy Research, the School of Competition Law and Market Regulation at the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, and the Forum of Indian Regulators. This is the 8th episode of the Know Your Regulator series, which means that we have covered 8 months, and this is really a milestone also for us. Despite the COVID and all the ups and downs, we have managed to bring the best regulators of the country every month in conversation at the KYR series. You see, today we'll be talking to the Chairperson of the Kerala State Electricity Regulatory Commission. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Preman Dinaraj. But before we start, let me set the context a little for the state electricity regulatory agencies in India. As we all know, electricity is a concurrent subject, and it has a federal dimension in the sharing of power and the responsibility between the state and the center. So this is also reflected in the electricity sector and the electricity regulation in India, because the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, that is the CERC, and we spoke a few months before, I believe in the month of December, with Mr. P.K. Pujari, the chairperson of the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, which regulates tariffs for generating companies owned or controlled by the central government and those with an interstate dimension, and also those concerned with interstate transmission of electricity. The state electricity regulatory commissions regulate tariff for generation, supply, transmission, and wheeling of electricity within the states. Beyond that, the state electricity boards were set up by the Electricity Supply Act 1948 to oversee generation, transmission, and distribution services. And a lot of water has flown since then, if I may put it that way. The CRCs and the SERCs were set up under the 1998 Act and later reconstituted under the Electricity Act 2003, with the objectives of depoliticizing the sector and incentivizing private investment. The Electricity Act 2003 was designed to consolidate the various laws governing the electricity sector, and it brought in 2 key changes. Number 1, generation was delicensed. And number 2, the state electricity boards were to be unbundled or separated into unifunctional utilities. The state in focus today, as far as the state electricity boards are concerned, is Kerala. And in the year 1958, the electricity department of the Kerala state was converted into the Kerala State Electricity Board under the Electricity Supply Act 1948. The KSEB was responsible for generating, transmitting, and distributing electricity within the state. Kerala, of course, we all know, is a land of mountains and rivers. And as such, the region is conducive to the generation of hydroelectricity. So in the 1980s, the state depended on a surplus supply of inexpensive hydroelectric power to attract energy-intensive industries. The KSEB even exported the surplus power to neighboring states to earn revenue. However, by the mid-1990s, there was a shortage of generation facilities coupled with growing demand. So the KSEB is understood to have turned into a net importer of electricity during this period. As a result, not only was the state deficient in power supply, but it also had to deal with KSEB's financial burden. In its present form, and I'd like to wrap up here because we have a wonderful panel waiting. In its present form, the Kerala State Electricity Regulatory Commission was constituted in November 2002 under the Electricity Regulatory Commissions Act 1998. It later came under the purview of the Electricity Act 2003. And the KSERC regulates generation, transmission, wheeling, and distribution of electricity within the state. It regulates power purchases and procurement processes, issues licenses, and determines tariffs for electricity operations in the state. With this, I would like to introduce our speaker for the day, Mr. Preman Dinaraj, Chairperson of KSERC. And we are delighted to have you with us, sir. Sir is an Indian Audit and Account Service officer of the 1984 batch, and a wonderful personality who's continued his education also. He's still pursuing his PhD at the moment from the Auckland University of Technology. Sir was also Principal Accountant General Kerala, and Principal Accountant General, Bihar. Before that, he was Accountant General, Chhattisgarh. And Sir is a director for at many boards. Sir is also member of the South Asian Forum of Infrastructure Regulator, and also for the Forum of Regulators. With that, sir, we know that we have so much to hear from you, and we are also joined in the panel by Dr. Ashwini Swain, who's a fellow at the Center for Policy Research, and Ms. Arkaja Singh, who's a fellow at the Center for Policy Research and is a part of the State Capacity Initiative at CPR. With those words, I give the mic to Arkaja to please take this forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abha. That is great. And very warm welcome to you, Mr. Dinaraj.
Thank you.
I think we could start this conversation by understanding a little bit about the Kerala State Electricity Regulatory Commission. Starting perhaps first of all with you, you could tell us a little bit about your engagement with the power sector, how you came to the Electricity Regulatory Commission, and then we can talk about the commission itself.
Yeah. In fact, to begin with, the minute you hear the term regulator, you know, at times it does convey a very negative connotation. It looks as if you're going to regulate everything, going to hold somebody else, you're going to be very difficult, and it does convey, because the terminology itself is regulatory, and anything which is regulatory, and I come from the audit department, which again is sort of regulatory, or you take up the income tax department. These are basically people whom nobody wants to at least welcome, though they are necessarily an evil which exists. So you have to live with us. So one of the first things, but then I was also lucky in the sense that, I spent considerable time, in fact, as many as about 20, 22 years outside the department and basically with the government of India. So in that sort of I would say an ecosystem where you had a lot of exposure, both at the government of India level. I was also lucky because I've already worked with the UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, basically looking after what is called the Great Lakes operations in East Africa. That was one. And thereafter, of course, spent time with the Republic of Mauritius, about 5 years there, and another 2 years with the government of New Zealand. So that sort of probably pulled me out of the regulator framework. So, typically, if you check up, if you ask about the Kerala State Electricity Regulatory Commission, we are a very friendly regulatory commission, or this is what most of our so-called regulated entities say, which are basically either the distribution licenses or the power producers or anybody else who come, even an average consumer who comes with complaints, because we also have a role as far as the consumer complaints are concerned, though not directly, but yes, we do intervene because we believe that every consumer is important. And, just because, we have a setup there, which is called the CGR, the Consumer Grievance Redressal Forum. We have 3 of them located in 3 parts of the state. We also have the State Electricity Ombudsman within our ambit. And generally speaking, if you look up in Kerala, by and large, complaints are there, no doubt. But I would say the attendance to this and the manner in which they have been sorting it out to a very large extent has been very satisfactory. And speaking about how I ventured into the power sector, well, it was by accident. It was by accident because at one stage I was director in the Ministry of Food, and I wasn't very happy because I was director subsidy, looking after Food Corporation of India, and that's a job which I didn't like particularly. So I was looking out for some avenue to escape. Getting a lateral shift within Delhi was difficult. So the Department of Atomic Energy was basically at that point of time looking out for somebody who could look after contracts. So I moved into the Department of Atomic Energy as a director, and they gave me a choice whether I would like to continue as a director in the ministry, which is again based in Bombay. It's called a department, but it's a ministry. Or alternatively to go in as general manager contracts in Nuclear Power Corporation. Well, Nuclear Power Corporation was attractive because In the government of India, at that point of time, the director did not get a car. Okay. I mean, you couldn't get a car, so you had to fend for yourself from your residence to office and back. Whereas the general manager contracts had an old Maruti, what is now called Eco. So that was probably the main attraction. So I said, look, let me move into the corporation. And but then I think that was a very right decision, because the intricacies of contracting, okay, the contracting laws itself, the disputes, the redressal fora, and the type of cases that you will come across in contracts are very, very unique. Each contract is a standalone and typical by itself. So that was a good exposure. For 2 years, I was general manager contracts, and in the meantime, I got promoted. And once I got promoted, of course, at that point of time, we were negotiating the Kudankulam contracts. What's called the Kudankulam 1 and 2 contracts, which is basically an intergovernmental agreement between the government of India and the government of Russia. So I was the principal negotiator on behalf of the government of India. So at that point of time, I moved into the board as a director of personal and industrial relations. But one of the conditions was that I will continue to carry on the job which I had already taken up, which was negotiation. So probably I would say that with a lot of satisfaction that I was able to see the what we call as the groundbreaking ceremony, and what in nuclear terms is called the first pour of contract. I mean, first pour of concrete of the Kudankulam nuclear power project at that point of time. Today it is generating 2000 megawatts of electricity. It's probably a relatively cheap source of electricity. It's about 4 rupees 12 paise a unit. And it is basically a base load station, which means 24/7 the power is available, reliable power, green power, and most importantly, it doesn't damage the environment, irrespective of whatever the so-called anti-nuclear lobby would like to mention.
So, thank you, sir. Thank you for that fantastic kind of bird's eye view of your background. That was fantastic. So we spoke in December to the chairperson of the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, Mr. P.K. Pujari, and he told us a little bit about, so we got a background there of what CERC does, and the intergovernmental nature of electricity regulation, the center and the states. So from that perspective, could you tell us a bit about the mandate of the State Electricity Regulatory Commission in formal terms, and how they are set up?
Yeah. Essentially, the establishment of the State Electricity Regulatory Commission flows from Section 86 of the Electricity Act 2003. Section 86 very clearly and elaborately delineates what is the role expected of the State Electricity Regulatory Commissions. So, Kerala State Electricity Regulatory Commission, or KSERC as we call it, is also set up under this act, under this particular section. As at the introduction, Abha had mentioned, the CERC is essentially entrusted with, with the central generating stations and the CTUs, the central transmission units. So they do not get into what is called the distribution sector. And let me tell you, the problems in the electricity sector, the cutting edge, or the people who are sitting at the, facing the problem, is at the distribution, because that is where you face the average consumer on the streets. And electricity is a very, very publicly sensitive topic. Governments are made and governments fall on the basis of electricity pricing. And of course, you are aware that there are free electricities being offered at the time of elections, etc., etc. So while not getting into the political context of electricity distribution, I would say that the role or the function or the manner in which an electricity regulator works in every state is that of a trapeze artist. Why? You are hanging there up. Yes, you have a net down. The net down, if you ask me what is it, I cannot be kicked out of my job. Because the act itself says that once you are appointed, it's as good as, you're stuck with him for the end of his career. So that is the safety net. But the pressures, the demands, the expectations, the requirements which are faced on a regulator are tremendous. And maybe at times, it becomes something like a circus where you have to balance the interest of a paying public vis-a-vis a subsidizing group of, consumers. For example, what we call as the HT, high tension, extra high tension, consumers, and the pressing demands as far as the state government is concerned, because they have certain, policy directions which they have to comply with. And very often subsidy is easier said than, availed. Promises are there, but getting subsidy, you know how easy it is. At the time of, giving the money, there is always a shortage. This is where the road comes. You also have to maintain the financial viability as far as the distribution licenses is concerned. And in Kerala, we have as many as, a small state, but 10 distribution licenses. I don't know how many other states have got so many, but we have 10 of them. And we have another 2 of them who are what is called as deemed distribution licenses. That is railways and military engineering service. So that if you add up the total, it comes to 12. And as I mentioned, this conflicting interest, which often is at loggerheads with one another, you have to do the balancing. You have to be up there and ensure that nobody falls down. At the same time, you also do not fall down. And this is a highly politicized, sensitive, role that you are functioning. So it's very easy for the whole thing to just boomerang. So that is the essential role as far as a regulator is concerned.
Ashwini, do you,
yeah. Thanks, Mr. Dinaraj. That's pretty useful insight about the role of SERCs. So maybe you can guide us a little bit about the structure of SERC, how structured, and generally, as opposed to, we have already taken the structure and roles of CERC to our audience. So we wanted to understand how the SERCs are structured in terms of human resource, expertise, those aspects.
Yeah. I'll begin with the very, with the commission itself.
Yeah.
The commission's, members, that is the number of people who constitute the commission, is as per the Electricity Act. The Act says that there shall be a chairman and 2 members. And interestingly, it does not say that somebody has to be from the power sector or someone has to be a technical man. It could be anybody. It says either from engineering, management, law, etc., etc. It's very, very wide. The net is very wide.
Yeah.
So the essence is to bring in people with experience and to see how well, because you see, these are practically end of life postings. So it's very important also at that stage to put in people who have the requisite, apart from qualification, the experience. And apart from experience, somebody who can manage this business. Because there is no point in saying, I'm qualified, I'm experienced, but I do not know how to react to situations. So the biggest challenge as far as the commission is concerned is the reactional part as far as any challenge is concerned. And let me tell you, the challenges are very, very common and not very easy at times to overcome. Below that, each regulatory commission have their own organizational structure. At the Forum of Regulators, we are now trying to have some sort of a standardized or a model structure, to evolve a model structure which we could have for at least most of the bigger regulatory commissions. Why bigger is because there are also as far as the northeastern states are concerned, there is a resource constraint, and maybe yes, the number of cases and the number of the quantum of work is relatively lower. That being the case, at least for the bigger SERCs, and I would include Kerala as a bigger SERC because we have got 10 distribution licenses. So in terms of work, yes, each is one on its own.
Yeah.
And we have 2 directors, or now we have a 3rd person also. We have a director legal. Now my member is, you see, right now I have a member legal. The 2nd post of member is vacant. The search committee is on its job, so hopefully we'll get it very soon. Below that, we have now sort of divided it into three, you can say, verticals. One is the legal. The legal is headed by the member legal. He has we call him a consultant because he's a retired additional special secretary from the government with about 38 years of experience in framing of regulations, laws, interpretation of laws, etc. And under him, he has got about 3 people only working under him. So that is the legal vertical. Then we have the technical vertical, which is headed by the director technical. The director technical is a deputy chief engineer from one of the utilities, in this case from KCB. If you ask me whether there is a conflict of interest, yes. At least book-wise, there is a conflict of interest. So one of the first things that we sort of advise or orient the person is to ensure that once you have left the organization, probably on deputation and come here, it's very important for you to unlearn in terms of the regulatory approach and how you should deal with the regulator. That's very essential. Otherwise, you see the man himself will come under conflict and the role of the regulator will get constrained because you see he himself has a conflict. So we have a director technical. Under him, we have a joint director and we have got 2 consultants. All are electrical engineers. And then, of course, under the chairman, we have everything else under the sun.
How many of these are market appointments and how many of these are on deputation?
Our attempt currently is to get into market appointments only. In fact, we had a commission meeting yesterday at which we took a decision not to take people on deputation. Because unless and until you have an in-house talent, which is oriented, nurtured, and developed, there is not going to be a fallback as far as the system is concerned. Okay, so it's very important for us to develop it in-house.
And what's the job market like for in these commissions? So, I don't know how many people from the commission staff ever become members, for example, but they may go up to the post of directors, they may apply across from one regulatory commission to another. Is there a job market in this and how vibrant is it?
Well, job market, as you very correctly said, going from the post of a director into a member is a fairly difficult. I'll tell you why also. There's a logical reasoning behind it. A person who has been only in the regulatory framework, unfortunately, does not have any direct exposure. Let me give you my own example. 10 years in the Nuclear Power Corporation. And if you are somebody who goes out and, gets involved with the electrical systems, the mechanical systems, how it works, then it is a different story. But if you constrain yourself within the regulator, then you are already exposed to the cases and regulations which come up before you.
And what about the job market between commissions?
Yeah.
Between industry and commissions?
Yeah, let me begin at the beginning. The initial appointments that we make is as consultant. They are basically electrical engineers, BTech. We don't take anybody below BTech, with about 3 to 4 years of experience. And I do not know how it will compare elsewhere. We pay about 35 to 40,000, depending upon, to begin with. Every year we give approximately a 10% raise. And yes, we have a very exacting, I would say, evaluation system. If you are not found to be delivering and in spite of, all hand holdings, then the person will run into difficulty and then we will politely tell the person to leave. But let me tell you, we have had very, very few such instances because the commissions are, at least to begin with, a good break. And many of our people have gone on to join NTPC and other power companies. And some of them at least mentioned to me that by working here, it was a plus factor. And they went before the interview and they said, look, we have been working in KCRC as, in the technical regulatory framework. They liked it. But I told them, now please ensure that there also you don't get into the same framework because then your entire vision will be very constrained.
So now to get to a slightly different aspect of this, the relationship between the state government and, we'll talk about the federal aspect of this in more length later, but I think the sort of organizational links between KSRC and the state government.
Well, that's a very, what do you call it, as a love-hate relationship. In the sense, as I mentioned right at the beginning, a regulator is somebody who is not welcome. And, you know, since I come from the audit department, I used to have a standard for an audit. That is, at the end of an audit party goes into the field, he does an audit. He comes back. When he comes back, if there are actual complaints, and I talk about complaints, I don't mean about at the personal level, that this man was poking his nose into this, he was trying to, you know, dig deeper, etc., etc. That means he has done a good job. Whereas, if a party comes and the auditee is very happy with him, that is not a very desirable state of affairs. So either he has compromised or he has not done his job. So the same thing applies here. You do a thorough job, people are unhappy. So you have, that is why I said the trapeze example I gave. You have to maintain the trapeze not only with the public but also with the powers that be.
So you've touched upon this at various points now in this discussion, but if you could, you know, list for us, like in the, you know, the key considerations and challenges in retail tariffs. No, so maybe first you could tell us a little bit about the different aspects of regulation, which we didn't cover. So there's the tariff setting dimension, and then there may be, you know, service standards, and then maybe some other things. And then what are the key considerations, if we could kind of make a link between what are the functions and the key factors in that trapeze artist role that you, that you spoke of.
Let us begin with the tariff setting, because that is probably what everyone sees, right? It's upfront. You know, you can't run away from it. So that right now we have what is called as the MYT framework, the multi-year tariff framework. It's multi-year in the sense, the essence of setting a multi-year tariff is to have some sort of a stability, to give some sort of an, you know, I would say an overage as to what exactly is going to happen in the next 5 years. To encourage investment and to give people some element of certainty. So currently, Kerala has just last week only announced the MYT for 2022, 23 to 26, 27. But interestingly, while I called it a multi-year tariff, I also mentioned that it is not multi, because I brought out the tariff only for 1 year. So if you look up, there is a disconnect between what I spoke and what I did. So that was the first question which came up. You know, we had a press conference and it's very widely covered. So the first thing they said is, this is not a multi-year tariff. This is a single-year tariff. Why? Well, there's a reason behind it. What normally happens, especially with a regulated entity, you give a tariff of 5 years. The management or the entity says, thank you very much. And it ends there. After that, any compliance that you would ask for, any requirement in terms of regulatory, you know, frameworks, chap doesn't bother, because whatever he had to get for 5 years upfront, you have given it. So thank you. We wanted to prevent that. That's one. Number two, at least in Kerala, we place a lot of importance on efficiency. You work efficiently, you get the rewards. That is, you get the reward. You here has got two dimensions. One is the entity itself, that is the distribution company. And the second entity here is the general public. And if you are able to function, you know, we have norms. And if you're able to better the norms, then that little element that you are able to chop as a result of this, the gain that you get, is shared 2/3 with the distribution licensing and 1/3 with the consumer. It means the tariff goes down. This is one aspect. On the other hand, imagine that, you know, I'm very lackadaisical and I'm just not bothered. And I do work the way I want and I'm very inefficient. We also ensure that this inefficiency shall not be passed on to the consumers. We will not allow it. If you have exceeded the norms, the normative values, we will check into why it has happened. And if it is not found to be reasonable, then we ensure that this is not passed on to the consumer. So this is one of the principles of tariff setting, to ensure that the optimum efficiency is achieved. But when you talk in terms of optimum efficiency, it is also equally important to ensure that quality power is delivered, because you can always save on cost. Don't do your regular maintenance. You will save on cost. Don't replace equipment which requires replacement. Okay, that is easy. That we don't compromise. So in what is called the operation and maintenance expenditure, we ensure that the repair and maintenance part is not compromised. If you find that there is a significant fall as far as R&M expenditure is concerned, immediately we ask for reasons. And if you find it is not satisfactory, then of course we give a direction saying that this has to be set right ASAP or within a time frame. This is one part, the tariff setting. The second part is regulations. And the tariff flows from regulations. The role of the State Electricity Regulatory Commission is that of subordinate legislation. The original legislation, the covering legislation, is from the Act. Thereafter, there is a delegation as far as the SERC is concerned to make rules, regulations, or orders, whereby the role which is expected of a regulator can be done in a free, fair, independent manner. This is the concept. So the second is to frame regulations. The third aspect, which is also mentioned as even in the Electricity Act, is to look into consumer grievances. I did mention that we already have what is called the CGRF, Consumer Grievance Redressal Forum, and the Electricity Ombudsman. Beyond that, if somebody, if their orders are not carried out, then there is section 142, which is basically non-compliance. So in case somebody files a case or a petition under non-compliance, yes, the commission will definitely look into it.
But so before we get into the consumer issue, could you tell us a little more about the regulation making process?
Yeah. Regulation making, as I mentioned, is a subordinate legislation. A subordinate legislation, if you go through the Act, essentially says that one, it has to be framed upfront, number one. Number two, it has to be pre-published. That means it has to be put onto the website. And if possible, if it's not very big, then you can even publish it in the newspapers. In Kerala, we essentially have what is called public hearings. And let me mention here that the public hearings are very well attended. You can imagine that the latest tariff, we held it in 4 districts out of 14. And we had as many as 300 to 500 people attending. And it becomes difficult for you to, and of course, people come and talk everything. It's also a forum to let off steam. But a lot of good suggestions, recommendations, criticisms come from that, and we note that. Thereafter, there is a stakeholder, there's a stakeholder consultation process. And once that is over, then the commission sits down to framing the regulations. Once the regulation is framed, it's final, it's not framed, but finalized, we publish it in the Gazette, and that's it. And a regulation which is finalized as per the Act cannot be questioned in the High Court. In fact,
does this have to be approved by the state government?
No.
So
no.
you published your regulation.
Yeah. In fact, let me also point out another thing in Kerala. Under the Act itself, the commission is a court. It's a civil court. And it has got civil jurisdiction as well as criminal jurisdiction. Both CPC and CRPC jurisdictions are there. That's one. Number two, the chairperson in Kerala has been given the rank, status, and all benefits of a judge or sitting judge of the High Court. So that also helps in the sense that the order that you come out, people call it as quasi, but I say there is nothing quasi about it. It's a judicial order. So any challenge to that essentially has to be in the appellate tribunal. Okay. And the only reason that you can question regulation is where the due process has not been followed. If the due process has been followed, that is, publishing it, pre-publishing, public consultation, stakeholder consultation, etc., etc., there is no way in which any court would intervene. And we have seen it in multiple times.
That's been well established, I think, in quite a few cases. Sir, can you tell us a bit about so you talked about this balance between the regulated entities and the consumers, and also that the consumers are quite active and engaged in the process and engaging with regulation making. There's a sort of developmental aspect of the electricity sector as well, of electrification of far-flung areas, reaching reliable supplies to far-flung areas, seeing that, vulnerable groups have secure, those kind of things, like the sort of developmental agenda that went behind electricity. Could you tell us a bit about that and the balance between that and, the other aspects?
Wonderful. Yeah. Let me give you my own state's example. That will probably be, very representative, I hope so.
And like things like long-term energy security,
yeah.
those kind of like things that no one is lobbying for so aggressively. Like,
okay.
The two active people are obviously the regulated entities and consumers.
Right. Kerala is one of the states which has done 100% electrification. Mm-hmm. In fact, we boast that even the most far-flung hamlet has been electrified. Yes. And to a large extent, we also not have electrified it. We also ensure that there is supply. Mm-hmm. Because electrification is one aspect. Providing supply is another aspect. There's no point in saying, for 2 hours I had lit a bulb and thereafter there is no current for the next 1 week. No, that we ensure. That is where the quality of supply regulations come into the picture. In case, there are specific norms that in rural areas, in case there is no electricity, how many hours is the time which is given to get it back? Otherwise, what is the fines which can be imposed, etc. And let me tell you, people are very active. People do file these petitions, and these petitions you don't require a lawyer. You can file it yourself. You can represent. It is more like a consumer court. You can come yourself and you can present. This is one aspect. The second is, as you correctly mentioned, yes, I would call it as some sort of a disconnect between consumers' interest vis-a-vis the distribution license. There is a
one more thing, of course, one more aspect is the farmers.
The farmers. Well, Kerala, there is hardly any farming worth its name.
Yes.
Okay. And the only farming that we have is cash crops. And fortunately, because of the rains, the cash crops do not require much rain. No, we do have, but they are only, if you look up as a percentage of the electricity used, it is less than 2%.
Okay.
Less than 2%. Let me give you the consumer mix. That is very interesting. Very, very different from most of the North Indian states. If you travel through Kerala, you will wonder where a village or a city began and where it ended. Because as you say, it is walled from one end of the state to the other end. Okay. And if you're lucky, you may even have a house which is in one village half and the other half in another village. That's also possible. And the typical Indian concept of having a village, okay, with farmland and a hamlet, that concept doesn't exist. Now, having said that, what happens with the consumers? I mean, I just lost track.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So what happens here is the consumer mix. We have approximately 1 crore 32 lakh consumers. Out of this 1 crore 32 lakh consumers, we have 1 crore 2 lakh domestic consumers. So you can imagine, it's about 28 to 29 lakhs only from the non-domestic, what is called the LT, low tension, the high tension, and the extra high tension. Okay. Now, if you look up again the actual consumption of electricity, up to 150 units. Now, when you talk of 150 units, it's an average, it's a common man. Somebody who's got a fridge, a fan, not a fan, but multiple fans, some little cooking equipment, etc. They are people who consume 150. For the first 40 units, it is free. That is the BPL families and people and certain identified groups like the tribal population. The first 40 units, they don't pay. Then 1 to 50, that is, this is totally free. The next 1 to 50, they pay only 1 rupee 50 paise per unit. So essentially, if you look up 15 paise 75, okay, so you hardly pay about 70-75 rupees. Thereafter, we have what is called the telescopic rate, the slab system, 51 to 100, 100 to 150. And if you look up, practically up to 200 units per month, which forms about 85 lakh of the domestic consumers. They are highly subsidized. The average realization is about 5 rupee 73 paise, whereas the average cost of supply is in the range of around 6 rupees 80 plus. So which means essentially there is a revenue gap as far as they are concerned. Now, where do you get this money from? Obviously from the subsidizing consumers. But then in Kerala, again, there is an issue because there is not much of industrialization. So if you start taxing the industries very heavily in terms of energy costs, then they would run away. So that is where again we ensure that by and large, they remain within that plus or minus 20%. In the current one, they are only plus 103%. In the present tariff that we have announced, 103%. But having said that, it is also our endeavor to see that the average cost of power supply comes down. That is something which is controllable. Okay. All wasteful expenditure you can reduce. All unnecessary manpower you can reduce. Okay. Power purchase cost can be reduced. So this is where now we are aiming at. Bring down the average cost of supply. So that, by and large. And let me tell you a good news. Kerala State Electricity Board for the first time has made what we call as a regulatory operating profit. Now, I'm using the word very carefully. Regulatory operating profit. If you take up the KCB's balance sheet, yes, you will still find that they are at a loss. But the loss is also very controlled. It's around 600, 650 crores, which is nothing compared to 3 and 3,500 crores they had 5 years back. When you talk of a regulatory operating profit, it means compared to the norms, when you regulate it, this year they made a profit of 70 crores. So probably that is something that, the effectiveness as far as the regulator is concerned.
Thanks, Mr. Dinaraj. So that's pretty useful insight into the structure of power demand and electricity mix in the state, consumer mix. So maybe a follow-up question to that. In terms of cross-subsidization, how much is the pressure between the two consumer groups you spoke about? I mean, we understand there's not significant agricultural load. It's the domestic residential users who require some kind of subsidy. And in terms of load, how much is the balance? And if there is any contribution from the state? And what's the broad mandate from the state government towards 24/7 supply and universal access to electricity?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The mandate, as you very correctly mentioned, is quality power, reliable power, 24/7, and ensuring that it reaches everyone. As I mentioned, there is no point in lighting a bulb in a hamlet and thereafter there is nothing happening. No. So that is the mandate. And let me tell you, to a very large extent, the KSEB has been very efficiently fulfilling this task. It's not only KSEB, I'm not talking about the other 9, because they are all limited in terms of space. And they are very specific. For example, Info Park. They are basically catering to, the computer-based industries. We have, for example, the special economic zone, which is again a constrained space they are supplying to their consumers. Like that. And then, of course, we have 2 municipalities, one in Munnar, where Tata Tea, which has now become Kandandevan Hill Produce Company Limited. It's a private company. They are supplying power. And in Trichur municipal region, the Trichur municipality is supplying power. So this is it. And when you spoke of subsidy, see, when you talk of subsidy, subsidy is a very tricky word to deal with. The minute you talk of subsidy, it implies that there is an element of money flowing in from the budgetary provision, which is necessarily not true. As I mentioned, for the first, for the BPL families, yes. And let me tell you, they are just 12,000 families. As far as the subsidy, quote unquote, I'm using the word subsidy in quote unquote, is basically it is cross-subsidization. The state government doesn't give any money for that. It is cross-subsidization, which means essentially the commission is tasked with ensuring that the cross-subsidy also comes in, because to ensure the financial viability of the distribution licensee is also a very, very important task, failing which, there would be no supplier. So when you talk in terms of subsidy, you have to ensure that the cross-subsidization also is on a reliable, reasonable, affordable. Okay. Let me give you the cross-subsidizing groups within the state of Kerala. One is the industries. And when you talk in terms of industries, these are basically the heavy industries. Not many, but they do subsidize. But again, we to a large extent ensure that they fall within the tariff policy of plus or minus 20%. That's number one. The second aspect that when we look into subsidy is the contributory factor is commercial. We are a little bit more, relaxed when it comes to norms of commercial, in the sense that yes, we do tax them slightly more, because you have to, sort of steal Peter to pay Paul. So it is only that you dip into somebody's pocket to put into somebody else's pocket. This is essentially what's happening. But in spite of all that, I'll tell you also, we just came out with our tariff about 2 weeks back, and there has not been any major hangama, which indicates that by and large, yes, because the average increase has been in the range of around 35 to 40 paise per consumer. And when you look up an average map, as I mentioned, about 80 lakhs, 150 units, even at 35 paise, or let us take it as 30 paise averaging, it's about 45 rupees a month.
Yeah.
And jokingly, I mentioned in the press conference that if you step into an auto, okay, and you travel for 100 meters, the minimum charge is 30 rupees. Yeah. For something which is 24/7, which is so essential in your life, and without which you cannot manage. Even if the electricity goes off for 10 minutes, immediately you'll have a phone call saying what's going on. Even the chairman of the Regulatory Commission, people ring up to complain. So I think that one cannot complain. And the last tariff revision that we had given to KSEB was in July 2019.
Okay.
If you look up the CPI WPI index, consumer price index as the vis-a-vis and the WPI index, and we do it on a weighted average of 70-30. CPI 70, WPI 30.
Yeah.
On that basis, the average inflation is in the range of around 19.8 for the 3 years.
Yeah.
Whereas the average increase that we have permitted during this latest tariff revision is 6.7. But even with 6.7, by ensuring a proper mix and distributing this, tariff increase across the board, we are not, except for, the free consumers. We have ensured that on an average, KSEB is going to get about 1,000 crores more. And when you look up their balance sheet loss of about 600 to 700 crores, vis-a-vis the contribution which will come in about 1,000 crores, this is probably going to be the first step in, a makeover as far as KSEB is concerned. From a loss making, to begin with, into an operational profit entity, they still have an accumulated loss of about 9,000 crores.
Yeah.
So the next task is to wipe it out.
Wipe it. So we can hope that KSEB will be at least break even this financial year. So yes. Going forward, one point you have brought up earlier, that the state regulatory commissions do provide forums like CGRF and Ombudsman for grievance redressal. At the same time, as you said, KSEB has been doing public hearings on the regulation. So ERCs are also providing important platforms for citizens' participation in regulatory process. And as you rightly pointed out, in Kerala and of course in other states as well, 75% of the consumers are citizens, basically people consuming electricity at homes. So it's nearly 2 decades, but you have been in the commission for 5 years. So what has been the experience with that? Is you pointed out the public hearings are highly participatory, but has it contributed to strengthening in the regulatory process, and how the interaction between consumers and regulators is evolving over years?
100%. Let me give you a concrete example.
Yeah.
We had just floated an amendment to what is called the RE regulations, the renewable energy regulations. And in the RE regulations, there was a proposal from KSEB to go in for gross billing, okay, rather than net billing. Because today when you look at it, essentially up to 1 megawatt, the consumers are eligible for net billing.
Yeah.
And you know what is net billing? Net
Yeah.
billing is where there is a facility for banking. That is, if I produce 50 units of electricity in a month and I consume only 40, I can bank this 10 units and the adjustment is done at the end of the year. So if it is an overall net export, then you have what is called the average power purchase cost.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a net import, of course, you pay for it.
Yeah.
Now, what happened was, when this came up, yes, the commission was initially inclined, but there was so much of public opposition. And the main opposition was very simple and very logical. They said, look here, Government of India, Ministry of Power and MNRE is encouraging the setting up of rooftop solar.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a subsidy scheme currently, it's called the Saurya scheme. Under the Saurya scheme, up to 3 kilowatts, there is a 40% upfront subsidy, which is deductible from the price that you pay to the installer.
Yeah.
And between 3 and 10, there is a 20% subsidy. On the one hand, the Government of India is trying to subsidize and incentivize the scheme. And on the other hand, now you want to go in for gross billing. This is a paradox.
Yeah.
This is a paradox. Okay, this is one aspect. Somebody even had done the calculation and pointed out that an average consumer, because of his net import, if it happens,
Mm-hmm.
gets between 100 to 150 rupees. Is it worthwhile for the distribution licensee to dip into something like 200,000 consumers' pocket just to take out 150 rupees each? Honestly, if you ask me, my answer is no. Similarly, whenever we bring out regulations, there are multiple aspects which immediately are brought up, like RE regulation itself. We had not fixed a time frame whereby once the system is energized, by what date has it got to be actually grid connected and metered? There was no time frame. There were hundreds of complaints. When we held the public hearing, people came out with definitely, they said no, not more than 7 days. That was debated. And yes, we have made it restricted now to 6 working days. So the contribution as far as public consultation is concerned is very good. Number 2, there is also an element, there is, I would call it as a sentimental issue also. We are in a democratic setup. Mm-hmm. And we have gone in for what is called the democratic decentralization. Power to the people. Yeah. You may not be able to sort of address all the aspirations or complaints of an average man. The very fact that there is a forum available, the very fact that the forum comes to you, okay, the very fact that the forum comes to you, they listen to you. More than half the complaints stop there. Yes, there is somebody, they do listen to us. Mm-hmm. And in case we are not able to address it, we also mention why we are not able to address it. Okay. What are the constraints? What are the difficulties? What's the problem? We do bring this out.
That is pretty useful. So just one quick last question before I hand over to you, Arkaja. You pointed out Kerala has multiple small distribution utilities, but also Kerala is one of the few states which has a vertically integrated utility, KSEB, which has both the generation and distribution functions. So how, I mean, while there was a central push as part of the E-Act to unbundle the sector, many states unbundled. So what has been the experience in Kerala? Is this model of vertically integrated utilities a sustainable model, or it could be a complementary model in the electricity system in India?
See, the model which is followed, the template, is something which is very unique. It's very unique because the Kerala government at that point of time said that we do not want to go in for this, trifurcation of the power companies. That was a political stand which was taken by the government, and yes, they have adhered to that. But as far as the regulatory framework is concerned, we can't have that system. Yeah. So what the then regulatory commission member and chairperson had insisted, as far as the regulators are concerned, you should have 3 separate, vertically unintegrated, not integrated. They can integrate it for their balance sheet purposes. We are not worried about that. But as far as the regulator is concerned, you have to have 3 vertically unintegrated entities. Okay. That is, they have to have separate accounts. JCB calls them as SBUs. That is, the standalone basic units, which are account rendering units. For example, there is an SBU-G, that's a generation. There is a separate SBU-T, the transmission, and there is a separate distribution. We get our accounts in 3 separate audited manner. So as far as the regulatory requirement is concerned, yes, it is met. To answer the second part of your question as to whether this is a sustainable model, well, it's survived since, I would say, since 2003.
Yeah.
Is it the best model? I cannot say. But then the fact of the matter is that the talent flows across.
Yeah.
In the sense, it is not that, you see what happens is somebody is in a transmission business. His entire life, if he doesn't go anywhere outside, he's very happy with his government job. Then his entire exposure is only to the transmission sector. Whereas in KSCB, because of the verticals, and there is cross transferability as far as the officers and staff is concerned, everybody gets a chance to work everywhere. So to that extent, the knowledge dissipation becomes pretty okay. People get it.
That's a really kind of fascinating aspect of it. The sort of the job, career trajectories and the type of jobs that the Kerala electricity sector can offer are better because of the fact that the entity is larger. That's a really kind of interesting dimension of this. Now, I'll start now to, we have between Ashwini and me, we have a bunch of questions about regulating in a federal setup.
Okay.
Because there's the federal aspect of electricity, concurrent list, and in a way, one could say that the electricity reforms, that more than a decade now, electricity reforms and the regulatory commissions have kind of settled the controversies. I mean, the whole thing is settled. What is the role of the state and what is the role of the center? But there is also, and what is the role of the state electricity regulatory commissions, and what is the role of the central commission? But obviously, the central commission and the state commissions have to do quite a lot of coordination between each other. And Ministry of Power, like the whole structure, there's a lot of coordination between the different people who are involved with setting electricity policy and regulating it. So could you tell us a little bit about the mechanisms for coordination and cooperation in a federal setting? This is the other aspect of, democracy. We talked about democracy and public participation, and now we want to talk about democracy and federalism.
Yeah, I'll talk about 2 dimensions to this. One is the regulator to regulator interaction. And the second is regulator to the policymaker, which in this case happens to be the government. So these are 2 distinct, I would say, verticals.
You're also policymakers. I mean, maybe there's
we are not policy makers, we are regulation makers. The policy is given by the government.
And you're filling up the
yes, the democratic decentralization. If you look up the 3 pillars, the policy is made by the government of the day. The regulators as well as the executive is there basically to, that's what I mentioned about subordinate legislation. The Electricity Act, the trifurcation, etc., was a policy decision. To implement that was the act, which is a legislative framework. The legislative framework through subordinate legislation was given to the State Electricity Regulatory Commission, which is basically a creature as far as the Electricity Act is concerned. It's a creature of the Electricity Act. Okay, let's first take up commission to commission. Honestly, I don't think there is much conflict. Honestly. Why?
Not conflict, but there is the need for kind of proactive coordination.
Coordination, yes. 2 things are very, very important. One is people should talk to each other. If each one of us sit in our citadels, nothing is going to happen. So the coordination will begin by when you meet people, you talk to them, and when you talk to them, you necessarily talk not only this, but at some time or the other, the relationship also transcends the official and becomes personal. So you understand each other. And that is probably one of the most important things as far as any regulator is concerned. That my concerns, without me having to be upfront, the other person should understand, and vice versa. This is very essential. This is first part. Well, there is a forum available, the FOIR. And let me tell you, the FOIR meetings are very, very hot. And in the sense that there is a lot of discussion, a lot of differences of opinion at times. In fact, off the record, once it so happened that we were in an FOIR meeting, and at 6 o'clock they had arranged for a small tour of Diu. We were in Diu. But the discussion had got so, what do you call it, so much interested or interesting. The meeting went on till about 8:30. And there were families which were accompanying, all of them waiting. So when we came out, the then CERC chairperson said, "Don't blame me, blame me." That is me. Because I had set the ball rolling. Okay. So that, but let me tell you, very, very detailed, elaborate, and intensive discussions take place at the FOIR meetings. And every decision is a well-considered decision at the FOIR. This is one. The second part is between the regulator and the state government. Tricky at times. Let me tell you also. There have been one or two instances where, there is a section 108. Under section 108, the state government, and section 107, the central government can give directions to the commission. It says that it is mandatory to carry out. So suppose they tell you, like, look, you reduce the tariff by 50%.
Do they invoke this power?
They have invoked, at least in my case, 2 times. The first approach is to tell the minister, look, you can't do this. Tariff setting is not in your district. But depending upon the person and his understanding and his advisors, he can listen, he may not listen. Now what happens if he doesn't listen and is adamant? Can you dare to defy? That is a very, very personal, I would call. Well, if you have the guts, please go ahead and defy. And when I say please go ahead and defy, one, your job is not at stake. You cannot be removed. Number 2, there are at least 2 or 3 appellate tribunal as well as Supreme Court decisions which say that it is of a recommendatory nature. If the commission feels that the direction which is given under section 108 does not fulfill the requirements which the commission considers essential, the commission has every right to reject it. And we have done it. Of course, we did it in a very polite manner. We went and explained and said, henceforth, before you issue a 108, please have consultation. There is no need for you to have a 108. You tell us. If it is possible, we will tell you. If it is not possible, there is no need in heading into a confrontation. So we have tried our best. And let me tell you also, the state government that way has been very cooperative. And we have got one of the best electricity ministers who understands things, who will not interfere. So that helps a lot. Again, it depends upon the personality of the people involved.
Is there a lot of coordination between the central government and the state regulators?
Not really.
Not really.
Not really. But yes, there are meetings which do take place, and the regulators are very upfront in the sense that when discussions come up, they sort of course, they rely upon the Electricity Act, and even when there is any requirement which is not strictly within this, if it is not possible, the regulators don't hesitate in telling you it's not possible.
But there isn't that everyday relationship that you might have.
No, never.
If I can ask a related question to this. So we spoke about the concurrent jurisdiction and regulator to regulator, regulator to state government relation. As part of this concurrent status and otherwise also, there's a shared resource allocation in the sector also. Some resources are with the state entities, some resources like coal generation is partly shared by the center, and the public finance which is put into the sector as well. So, and as I understand in Kerala, Kerala is pretty much dependent on central generation for thermal power particularly. So how does that make the role of regulator complicated or easy? And particularly, I would like to hear your opinion about the recent power shortage which we faced in April onwards. And I don't know about Kerala, but in other states, there was a little bit of blame game between the center and state, where the states blamed center didn't supply coal on time, center blamed state didn't pay for coal. So what's the role and how the regulators facilitate in this kind of situation?
Right. See, essentially every power purchase is governed under a contract.
Yeah.
And the contract is between the generating company. And when I speak of company, practically all companies are governed under the Indian Companies Act, 2013. Okay, so strictly speaking, the government does not have any role to interfere in the day-to-day functions of the company. Number one. Second point, the supply of electricity to a distribution licensee like KSEB is governed under a contract. So again, at least it has been my experience that under no circumstance has the central government interfered and said, don't supply power to Kerala, because they have refused to carry it out. Because the supply of power is governed under the power purchase agreement. The third point that you raised, yes, there has been some conflict between, we are lucky in the sense, we do not have any thermal power plant. Did Kerala have a thermal power plant? Situation may have been what you said. Yes, it could have been slightly more difficult because the coal import, the coal allocation, the prioritization, all this would have come in. Kerala, you see, if you look up, we consume approximately about 24,000 to 25,000 million units yearly. 30 to 32% of the total power production is in-house within the state, and most of it is hydel. So doesn't really this thing. And we have a very little contribution of solar, which is basically rooftop solar and a few solar farms, and of course wind, not significant. So fortunately, I would say that we don't come into the picture. But yes, when you look at it in a broader framework, there is a scope for conflict. And my methodology or my suggestion in this manner to resolve it would be to talk to the concerned people. I mean, what happens is when a distribution company goes before a generator, I'm talking generally because I have been a generator myself. 10 years I was in the Nuclear Power Corporation. By and large, the generator is able to dictate terms, by and large. The reason being because he can always curtail power, or he can try and do, not prioritize and give it to somebody else, etc. So long as you don't infringe upon the contractual obligations. Okay. So what happens is when the discussion happens between the distribution licensee and the generator, there is I would say a position of strength vis-a-vis a position of relative weakness. Whereas if they take the support of the regulator, okay, where they also request the regulator to intervene in the matter, and it has happened in Kerala. I will tell you a typical example. NTPC has got a plant in Kayankur, and this is basically the liquid fuel based. The contract was for 15 years. The contract began in 1999, and the 15 years was over in 2014. Okay. At that point of time, the power situation was not very reliable. So Kerala said we would like to extend it by another 10 years, but it was only an exchange of letters. No formal contract was signed. At that point of time, the oil prices started rising, and the cost per unit was coming to around 12 rupees. So that is the period when 2017, we stepped in and we said, look, this is not viable. So then NTPC said, in that case, because you have already told we have to keep a plant running, please pay us 300 crores fixed charge to begin with 5% escalation on a year-to-year basis for the next 10 years. So that would, at the last year, it would amount to as much as about nearly 475 crores per year, without even getting a single drop of electricity from there. This was a situation that we faced. So now what do? We stepped in and we said, step one, we said, look, we do not want to continue with this particular obligation. Number two, there has been an exchange of letters, yes, but there has been no formal contract which has been signed. Because if you go through the Electricity Act, approval of the power purchase agreement by the appropriate commission is a condition precedent. So unless and until you fulfill the condition precedent, you do not actually have a legally valid contract. Of course, this is debatable. This is debatable. But we took this stand and we said, look, there is nothing. Number two, this is a fully depreciated plant. In 15 years, the plant was fully depreciated because it was a liquid, liquid fuel plant. On a liquid, a fully depreciated plant, if you're going to give us about 300 crores a year, look, we would like to get in. I mean, we would not like to proceed with it. We brought out an order saying that you will not buy a single unit and you will not pay a single rupee. Well, NTPC, because of again personal relationship between the licensee, the commission, and NTPC, sat across the table and hammered it out. We are paying 100 crores with a reduction of about 5% a year to year, and only for a period of 5 years. So it is possible. We can sort of discuss, and let me tell you, the generators are also fairly reasonable. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this has been my experience.
What you've given us is a nice kind of federal perspective of the electricity sector, but the spend because of the concurrent list nature of the subject. The broad policy direction is, of course, the center holds quite a lot of leverage as far as that is concerned, and there is a policy push towards a nationally integrated electricity market for various reasons, which makes sense when you're looking at it from the perspective of the center. But how will this change what is your view of this, and how will it change the role and functioning of the state electricity regulation?
You see, I have a very, very strong view regarding a nationally integrated grid. Especially with reference to one nation, one price. Conceptually excellent. I mean, it's the best of socialism that you can expect. But when you have two plants of one generator side by side, one, the cost of power is 2 rupees 50 paise because it is a fully depreciated plant. And the next plant, which came 25 years later, selling at 4 rupees 50 paise. Ownership remains with the same person. The location is the same location. The grid which is transmitting is the same, but the prices are different. I think charity should begin at home. So before you talk in terms of uniform electricity pricing, let us first talk in terms of uniform electricity pricing at the generator level. And when you talk in terms of generator level, there has to be some sort of a basket. Okay, but when you talk in terms of a basket, many big generators, without going into any specifics, are not interested. The reason being because the later plants are much more expensive and therefore the power tariffs are much higher. The older plants are fully depreciated. Let me give an example. IICA. IICA was COD. Commercial operation date was sometime in 74, 75. The cost of power is only O&M because water is free. O&M 63 paise. Okay. Similarly, there are other thermal plants, not in Kerala, but elsewhere. There is a fully depreciated plant where practically the cost of this thing is only fuel and O&M charges. The plant cost is fully depreciated. It's been fully recovered. 90% recovery has already happened. So if you sort of mill these two together, overall there will be a net reduction, especially for the large generators. So before you think in terms of a single pricing for electricity, let us have a single generational price to begin with, because that is where the origin happens. That is where the food is cooked. If you put more ghee, it will have one taste. If you put less ghee, it's going to have another taste. Mm-hmm. So that is why I say I have a very strong voice. Number two, you raised another very interesting point, which is something which the FOIR has been discussing. What happens if there is a conflict between a direction which is given by the MOP and at the state level, the state or the SCRC takes a stand that we will not implement it. This is an issue which has now come up for discussion at the FOIR level, because you see, essentially there's a very tricky balance which is involved here. The order which is issued by MOP, even if it is under the Section 179 of the Electricity Act, it is still an executive order. It is not subordinate legislation. This is a very important factor which is to be understood. MOP orders are executive orders. They are not subordinate legislation. They do not follow the due process of pre-publication, or no, they may follow, but they do not have a requirement of this. Merely complying to something does not authorize you to call it a subordinate legislation. What is subordinate legislation is very clearly defined. Who has the power to do it is clearly defined. So generally, they do not come out with publishing, pre-publication, public consultation. Even if it is there, that does not have a regulatory coverage, or not a regulatory, but a legislative coverage. Whereas every regulation, rule, order issued by the Commission is subordinate legislation. This subordinate legislation is done for and on behalf of the concerned legislature. In this case, it is the Parliament. So what happens in case there is a conflict? This is an issue which FOIR is right now concerned with. In the last, I would say last 1 year, the stand has been that if you cannot implement something, please don't implement, but don't get into a confrontation. That has been the stand that has been taken. Don't get into a verbal confrontation or into a writing confrontation. If and when it becomes an issue, at that point of time, there are courts to settle this matter, which has precedence. An executive order or a subordinate legislation framed by a duly authorized commission. This is an issue which is now coming up. I do not know how it will play out in the long run. Probably this is an issue which will go to court and has to be, adjudicated upon. This is what I understand.
Thank you. Thank you for this.
Actually, I have the last question for you. And then we have quite a few questions from the audience. And
definitely.
I think we might have some from the people here as well.
Sure.
So, yeah. Ashwini, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Arkaja. And in the interest of time, with my last question, I'm trying to bundle a couple of audience questions as well. We have few minutes now. So we spoke about how the sector is in Kerala and how regulation happens at state level, and that's very insightful. Let's talk a little bit about the future. So there's an energy transition which has started in the country. We eventually have to move from fossil to non-fossil electricity. And by the way of doing that, the structure and nature of this sector has to change and evolve. And we may disagree on the pace and time of this transition, but this transition is inevitable. It's going to happen. So my first question is, what's your vision about Kerala? How this transition will shape up in Kerala? And if that does happen, I'm building on a question from Durbak Agarwal. As new technologies come into the sector and new business models also develop, how the regulatory role will evolve, what kind of skills, expertise will be required, and how the role will change over time. And my last question in this set of questions, so until now, not just in Kerala, but in several other states, regulators have played an important role towards promotion of renewable energy. And that's largely because we have central regulations, guidelines on RPO, and regulators have an important role to ensure RPO compliance, renewable purchase obligation for audience. But we haven't seen much proactive role in terms of energy efficiency, demand side management. And that's something which happens at the utility level or consumer level, with whom the state regulators have more interaction. So what do you think about that aspect? And this is a question from one anonymous attendee, so I'm building on that. So over to you.
The question number one that you asked specifically was about Kerala.
Yeah.
And especially in terms of fossil fuel. As I mentioned earlier, Kerala does not have any thermal plant. So to that extent, we are relatively away from the fossilization effect and its impact on the climate change. Kerala has practically only, I would say, renewable sources. And when I talk of renewable sources, I mentioned 30% is hydro. And whatever new plants which are coming up, all of them practically, all are either wind or solar based. So they are essentially renewable. So Kerala is not going to face this issue of fossil fuel vis-a-vis renewable, the conflict which will come in, what happens to retiring of plants, etc. We are not going to face it because we don't have it. We had only 2 plants. One was a BSES plant, which retired about 2012, and now Kayankulam. And you know, Kayankulam, they have done an excellent job, NTPC. What they have done is, Kayankulam, because it is along the backwaters, they have about 200 acres of backwaters with them. They have put up 82 megawatt of floating solar. About 40 megawatts is already being produced. And the commission determined rate is 3 rupees 16 paise, 3.16 floating solar. So they are now utilizing this land. The second question that came up was evolution of the role of regulators, especially in an emerging economy. Well, that is going to be very, very challenging. It's going to be challenging because, as you are aware, there is a proposal to amend the Electricity Act. There is a proposal to de-license the distribution sector. What essentially will happen is, as I see, probably the private companies would come in. Already the discussions on separation of a cash and carry, that the wire business vis-a-vis the distribution, that has already happened. So what will be the, I mean, as I see it, by and large, the private players would like to concentrate in major urban areas or large towns. Now, that is essentially going to put a lot of stress on the SCB, because the SCB does not distinguish between an urban consumer, a group of people living in a flat, vis-a-vis a far-flung hamlet somewhere in Idiki. You know, they supply power to everyone, all at the same cost. Whereas what happens is, when you decentralize distribution, this is a real danger which is going to come in. Now, how the regulator will step in and ensure that level playing fields are ensured, that is going to be a challenge, because if the distribution sector is decentralized and there is no requirement for licensing of the distribution companies which come into existence, and if as a matter of right they can utilize open access, then that is going to be a very, very big challenge, because it will lead to lots of disputes and lots of I would say petitions, cases, arguments, and that will threaten the very sustainability of every SCB. This is going to be the biggest challenge. Then you also spoke about RPO and DSM mechanisms. As far as RPO is concerned, Kerala, unfortunately, still is yet to comply with the RPO, the obligations. I would say, I mean, the commission had, after much deliberation, given an RPO target which was lower than what was notified by MNR. It was lower, but even the target could not be fulfilled. But in the last 3 years, the situation has now turned around. Kerala is expecting about 1,000 megawatts of rooftop solar. They have already contracted for about 800 megawatts of, again, various mix. It includes both the wind and solar. They are also thinking in terms of stepping up, having another 4 generators in Idiki to generate another 850 megawatts. So as far as the RPO obligation is concerned, Kerala will not have a problem. Let me also tell you, the southern states also do not have a problem. Tamil Nadu is already in excess of RPO because they have got a huge element of wind. Karnataka, again, in terms of water resources, that is hydro. In terms of solar, they also have. Telangana, Andhra, they do not. Southern states will not have an RPO problem. So, in fact, the issue is going to be the impact or the the effect that it is going to have on the transmission system, especially with reference to maintaining the frequency. Yes, there has been a lot of thought, especially at the Forum of Regulator, the FOIR level. The technical committee has been addressing it. various solutions have been suggested, including having a spinning reserve, so as to ensure that at any given point of time, the frequency is maintained. This is one challenge which is going to come in. And let me tell you, nobody is willing to directly step in and offer his plant as a spinning reserve, especially the hydro one, because they can come on stream at the shortest possible time. Number one. Number two, it is like, not in my backyard. Everyone wants the benefit, but not in my backyard. This is the approach. So something will have to be hammered out between the various states, and so that, everybody takes it. Or alternatively, even if you set up spinning reserves at the central stage, who will bear the cost? What will be the basis of cost? So this is another aspect which has to be looked into. So this is another challenge which will come up, another emerging challenge. As more and more renewables get inducted into our grid, it is definitely going to cause a lot of problems, and that will have to be addressed. And there is a cost for that. The third one that you spoke about was DSM. See, DSM essentially is a function as far as the utility is concerned. Okay, demand side management. Kerala to some extent has already been doing it. When does the actual challenge of DSM come in? During the peak hours. And let me tell you, in Kerala, the peak hour is only from 6 to 10. It is not from 5 to 11 or 6 to 11. We just got 4 hours only. There has been a demand to increase it from 5 to 11. We did not agree to that. It is 6 to 10. Okay. And as domestic consumers, we have excluded them. As far as the others are concerned, we have already installed TOD meters. TOD meters are already there. And now with the introduction of, the smart meters, we would expect that at least the high-paying consumers. See, you cannot replace let me give you an example. There was a proposal to install smart meters throughout the state. Yeah. So this is going to be on an OPEX model, an operational expenditure model. And the company had said that they would, the costing would be about 140 to 142 rupees per consumer per month. Now you compare that with the 7 rupees, which is currently being paid by consumer. That is a very big. So while we definitely welcome, the smart meters, the implementation has to be stage-wise. It has to begin with the higher-paying consumers. In fact, most of the higher-paying consumers, especially the industries, the HT, EHT, they are already on TOD. They have already been demanding that the electricity pricing should be on the basis of voltage. Okay, so this is something which we will have to address. Smart meters, yes, we can introduce, but they say they are not willing to spend money on the smart meter. Their TOD meters, by some little change as far as the software is concerned, will be able to address this issue. Sorry, that is what they are saying. I do not know. But yes, we will now be slowly moving into the smart meter regime. Yeah. And the DSM essentially, we hope, will be managed by the distribution company. And there will be various incentives and disincentives in terms of, demand side management to ensure that there is not too much of peak load peaking at that point of time, that it doesn't jump and then come down again. So that will have to be distributed.
So some of our colleagues in the room have a few questions also, and we have one last question. So I'll just read out the last question by Disha. I think her question about renewable energy has been addressed, but she had another question about the payment behavior of rural consumers and whether you have do you have an opinion of the payment behavior of rural consumers? Do you have some benchmark framework for maintaining customer service in terms of supply hours and quality of supply and timely billing? But don't answer this yet. We'll also just see about our colleagues who have questions, because we're a little bit running to the end of time. Bharati. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. That was a very interesting, comprehensive.
Could you zoom out?
So my question is related to technologies that have been introduced, something like smart meters, but it's more in terms of, so I really found your metaphor of the trapeze artist very interesting. So usually you have three kinds of roles that somebody like a body like the Electricity Commission would play. It would be it would have legislative role, it would have a legislative role, a judicial role, and an administrative or a managerial role. But you also discuss, I think, some kind of balancing that happens, and you have to balance the subsidization and revenue gap. So in a certain way that the board is also playing a role of some kind of revenue generation in addition to its other three roles. So something like in a role like that, something like a smart city project, which is quite, I mean, at least for maybe not a city like Kochi, but some other parts, it would have a certain impact on the revenue generation and the kind of electricity that's used. So how, is there an interface between the commission and projects like that, and what kind of interface that is? And, how does that get impacted by the new technologies like smart meters? Because they are consumption meters at some level. And just, I'm so sorry, my question is going long.
No, please go ahead.
I just have a smaller question, which is slightly unrelated, but I'm very interested in knowing, but you said that you do hire a lot of people from the from the market. Is that a policy decision, or is that a something that's just a trend that's growing? That's something that's happening with smart cities as well, the special purpose vehicles. And is there a mix? Is there a flow between such corporations and into the commission at a lower level?
Yeah, I think I'll begin with something very interesting you mentioned.
Right.
I'm really confused about this concept of smart city. I'll tell you why. I mean, I really don't know what is smart city. They are saying Trivandrum smart city.
You answered Disha's question also first before the Disha's question about the rural consumer.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'll begin with that. We boast that we have over 99% recoveries. Our due recoveries, monthly dues recoveries is more than 99%. And people, as far as payments are concerned, are very compliant. Not because they are all very God-fearing and very sensitivized, etc., etc. Very simple. Otherwise, your fuse will be removed. Okay. If you don't pay on a bi-monthly basis, you will get a message on your mobile warning you that please pay by this date, failing which you will have the pleasure of sitting in darkness. Okay. So, and they are very prompt in that. So everybody would pay for the simple fear that otherwise my connection will be disconnected. So that is probably the danda. So, and we have the current, our targets are more than 99%. We have given a target of 99% recovery. This is one. The second aspect that you spoke about is regarding smart city, right?
Yes.
Smart city, yes. As I mentioned, I am very, very confused about the word, about what is smart city. You have a Cochin smart city. In Cochin, there is a smart city. Trivandrum, there is a smart city. And I am fortunate to have a distribution licensee, which is called smart city. So now I'm totally confused. What is smart city? I have formally a distribution licensee whose registration says smart city. And mind you, it's a private company.
Cochin has two actually. One is under the smart city mission, and there was an older one which was a private company.
Private company. It is owned by Dubai Leasing, by the Dubai Leasing. Okay. So, I mean, it's very, very confusing as to which is mission and which is not in the mission. Anyway, the smart cities, unfortunately, there is no transactional flow or exchange of information between A, the commission, and B, the electricity board. Because the essence of any distribution licensee is the licensing area. And whatever we are now trying to do is well within the smarts. The smart city is already in the licensing area. So whatever you are doing, you are only contributing to the efforts of the distribution license. So, but again, in the case of KCB, any expenditure more than 10 crores, capital expenditure, has to have the prior approval of the commission. So any of these smart city projects, if it exceeds 10 crore investment, which is not a very large amount, let me tell you, the average average investment is about 4,000 to 5,000 crores. So if you just look up, divide by 10 itself, that will be around 40, 50 projects coming up every year for examination. In that case, yes. What is anticipated? Let me give you one example which has just happened now. Trivandrum Smart City, they have done trenching. Okay, part of this thing, because you know you have got cables all over the place. You have got you can't you have got telephone cable. You have got this what is it? This our internet cables. You have got all sorts of cables running everywhere, and nobody has a map. So you don't know where you dig and what you hit. This is the condition today. So now what they're doing is they are putting trenching. The trenching has got facility. This is under a smart city project, and the trenching has got facility for everyone. And yes, there may be a user charge which will be finally charged either by the corporation or the smart city. I do not know, but this is a very noble effort. And since they are spending money, the cable is being run through the trenching, and definitely when you do this sort of cabling, it's going to cost more than 10 crores. So KCB has filed a petition saying that, look, this is what we are doing under the smart city project. As far as the funding is concerned, yes, I believe that there is some funds which is flowing in from the smart city mission, and some of it flowing in either from the state government or alternatively from KCB's funds. And wherever, you know, in our pricing of electricity, the tariff, we ensure that anything which comes free means either by way of a grant or by way of a consumer contribution, is never allowed as part of the tariff. If you give, say, 20 crores for a particular project and the overall capital cost invested is about 50 crores, for the tariff purpose, we calculate only at 30 crores and not at 50 crores. This is and when it comes to the other smart city, unfortunately, it has not been doing well. It's been running at a huge loss. And both the smart city project is running at a loss. Not project, but they set up the electricity business is also running at a huge loss. Whatever they anticipated, they have not been able to get. Maybe because of COVID and all that. But things have not looked up.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dinaraj. I mean, this has been, I think, a fantastic initiative where we have now delved into a state regulator, and we are absolutely delighted to have started with you, sir. I mean, we always knew that you are a fine orator, and the transparency with which you have shared the ideas and your thoughts, it's been absolutely wonderful. And a lot of food for thought. And now I think our audience and ourselves as researchers, as teachers in the subject, we have a fair idea, you know, of a comparative analysis if one were to do between the functions and the outlook that the CERC has vis-a-vis a state regulator. And we hope to continue this journey by talking to more chairpersons of state electricity commissions. So on behalf of the Center for Policy Research, the State Capacity Initiative, as well as FOIR and the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, I extend my warmest thanks to you, and thank you so much for the audience here as well as the audience that is there live with us. Thank you all. Thank you to the panelists, Dr. Ashwini and Arkaja. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think
Abha, Ashwini, everybody, and to our audience, our colleagues in the room, and people who joined us online. This was really fantastic, and we hope to do many more of these talks.
Thank you very much, and I must thank all the audience for a very patient hearing. I don't know whether I've been able to address your concerns. I really don't know, because you know, when we have this sort of a video conferencing, yes, that personal warmth is missing. So in fact, in my public hearings during the COVID period, we were having a video conferencing, but then the public came out and said, no, now that, you know, COVID has receded, let's have one-to-one.
Right. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you then.
Thank you.